Thanks for joining today's episode. Before we start, in today's episode, we'll be talking about gender based violence and the systems of support that are available. We will provide other resources in this episode, but want to remind you that if you or anyone that you love needs support during or after listening or anytime, you can always contact 211 for resources in your area. So, where do you turn for help when the place you should feel safest become the most dangerous? Gender-based violence affects individuals and families across our community, but it can be overwhelming to reach out for help. There are supports available, and understanding what their process looks like could help survivors find and access the right support. So, welcome to today's Do Local Good podcast created by United Way of the Alberta Capital Region and the team of volunteers on the Gen Next cabinet. We feature stories and people from the Edmonton region to inform, inspire, and invite others to join us in building resilient and thriving communities. We are your host, Baichi and Yawa. We are here with Emma Potter and CMHA Director of Service Systems Operating 211 and Ashley Baxter, Director of Shelter Operations at Windhouse, a women's shelter providing safe refuge for those fleeing violence. We have been talking about the work they are doing to make finding support easier. Let's jump back in. Emma and Ashley, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you both for being here.
Mhm.
And I think we just started by she gave us an amazing introduction. So domestic violence or gender-based violence is a very heavy topic. So before we kind of get into it for the audience, can you both, in your respective experiences, kind of paint the picture for what does domestic or gender-based violence look like in the Alberta capital region? So Edmonton, Calgary, any of the spaces that you work and support, and who is most impacted? And this is just kind of give the audience a picture of what it actually looks like because I feel like a lot of us have preconceived notions of what domestic violence is, who it actually impacts, and whether or not it's our problem or not. So, a little bit of a loading question, but I think it's really important to help the tone and the landscape of kind of like the rest of the episode. So,
Yeah, for sure. So gender-based violence is also an umbrella term that includes domestic violence.
mhm,
It also includes street violence. It includes a landlord who might be power over their tenant.
mhm,
It's any sort of violence that is perpetuated based on gender.
mm,
And so within domestic violence, typically the abuser is male,
right,
the perpetrator is male, and the victim is female.
mhm,
6% of men do experience domestic violence,
mhm,
but the majority of the victims are female. We see a lot of economic abuse. We see a lot of technology abuse.
mhm,
We see, again, landlords asking for sexual favors
mhm,
to keep their apartment
right,
to avoid eviction. We see older adults and their children abusing them.
mhm,
So a lot of senior abuse, and we see um, immigrant related,
mhm,
newcomer related abuse that
mhm,
sponsorship abuse and fear of you know r- not allowing people to learn the English
mhm,
language, so keeping
mhm,
them very
mhm,
isolated.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. So it sounds like, and just to clarify what you mentioned, there's domestic violence, which is the umbrella. And then within that, you can have intersections of violence, whether it's gender based, which you identified as based on either male, female, female, male, et cetera. And it sounds like there's a lot of different intersections. Something I didn't even think about was, landlord and tenant, or even older children and seniors. So thank you so much for clarifying that. And even some of the other intersections of what happens in domestic or in gender-based violence. So can you maybe talk a little bit more about housing instability or coercive control, what that kind of looks like, or cultural stigmas in terms of how to escape a situation in terms of domestic violence or gender-based violence? And you also talked a little bit about the immigration and newcomer thing. So based on your experience, what can you let people know about any of those intersections that maybe perhaps they wouldn't know about otherwise?
So around housing instability, it really comes down to our housing crisis currently. There is nowhere for people to go. So to leave a situation which typically leaves you with nothing, you're
Hmm.
leaving everything behind, usually due to control.
Right.
So a lot of people think that gender-based violence or domestic violence or intimate partner violence are all um, i- physical.
Hmm.
Physical violence is actually near the end of a journey
Hmm.
within. It's usually what creates is usually the trigger point for someone to start thinking they need to leave is the
Right.
physical violence.
Hmm.
The violence it starts slow, and that's the coercive control. Is the it starts with um, limiting their social circle, pulling in their
Hmm.
finances, reducing the amount of control they have in their life,
Hmm.
without really realizing it. It's your idea. Like my friends are a bad influence, and
Hmm.
I don't need a job because I'm perfectly stable
Hmm.
here. And so then as it goes, and then the violence comes into play,
Hmm.
and then the person makes a decision to leave, and they go to a shelter. They haven't had a job. They haven't had a bank account. Their
Yeah.
house isn't in their name, and they need to start from scratch.
Hmm.
And in our shelter, we work with supporting people to get into stable living situations. However, it is so hard. There's no housing, and it is
Hmm.
expensive. And the housing instability and the housing crisis really creates this pattern where do I live in a communal shelter for a long term while we're waiting for a stable housing, or do I return to um, what I can expect?
Hmm. Hmm. And I'm glad that you mentioned that the part about people or physical violence usually being the last thing when it comes to domestic violence, because I think people think that domestic violence or gender-based violence is the black eye or
Mm-hmm.
it's the bruises or it's the things that you can see, but a lot of the time there's the verbal, there's the emotional, financial, even spiritual, a lot of things that kind of gradually build up before it gets to that quote unquote black eye.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that's the trigger for someone to actually think about leaving, because it doesn't necessarily mean like after that physical abuse they're right at the door. That's probably a long laborious process of trying to figure out, because like you mentioned, you try to leave and you realize you actually don't have any finances, you actually don't have any property, you actually don't have any capital or resources to actually take those steps. And you mentioned the supports that you kind of provide through in-house, which was kind of my next question. We'd love to understand better, what does navigating those supports look like step by step. For example, if somebody is facing gender-based violence or just needs some advice in a difficult situation where they want to leave, want to look at their options, how can they reach out for help, and what does that look like either through Winhouse or through the supports through 211?
I can start off that one. So I think the first piece is kind of an awareness that something's not okay.
Hmm.
And so that's why we often tell people that there are helplines out there to support. So 211 is one of them. You can also phone the crisis line at the shelter. And we like to say 211 is a really low barrier one, because we are not just a support for domestic violence and gender-based violence. We're a support for all of your social needs that
Great.
you may have. And so you can reach out. It is confidential. There's an anonymity to reaching out. There's a
Hmm.
lot of fear and stigma
Right, of
around
course.
reaching out if you're experiencing any kind of abuse or
Hmm.
violence.
Hmm.
And so we want to have that barrier be low and to provide opportunities for it to happen in a safe way
Hmm.
within the control of the people who are reaching out.
Hmm.
And so they can call anytime, 24/7 with 211. They can text, they can do chat, they can do
Hmm.
uh, phone. And it's really about opening the door to that awareness
Yeah.
that this is not
Yeah.
okay. This is not right. This is not safe for me.
Hmm.
And letting the person who's experiencing this in their life share the story in the way that they feel the most comfortable.
Hmm.
And our staff want to make sure always that people are safe.
Hmm.
And so we want to be able to identify and address that immediate safety for the person we're talking to and anybody else who might be impacted. Particularly, it comes up often where there's children involved, and we want to make sure that they're safe,
Hmm.
and that they can identify that they're safe, and they can identify how they feel they can continue to stay safe or to move into safety.
Hmm.
And so it's really a conversation of kind of unpacking that this is not okay, and that there is help
Yeah.
and that there is support for people, and that they have agency and control
Mhm.
in accessing
Mhm.
that help, because
Mhm.
that's something that gets taken
Taken
away
away, right,
in these
right.
relationships, right? And so
100%.
we want to be able to have that conversation about what's going on, what are the potential options, and to show that there is choice
Mhm.
and that there are safe places to reach out to, because we
Mhm.
know also that the barrier for reaching out for help is high.
Yeah.
And we know the impact of a bad experience when somebody reaches out and discloses something so personal to
Yeah,
them
can be detrimental.
is super detrimental.
Mhm.
We want to make sure that they're going to come back for support.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so on 211, we're really looking at where are you at right now, and what do you need right now, and what might you need in the future,
Sure.
and
Mhm.
how can we make sure that you have the knowledge about what is available
Mhm.
to you. And so often that is, I'm ready to leave.
Yeah.
I want to get out of here. I
Mhm.
don't have a safe place to
Mhm.
go.
Mhm.
And we're heading off into the win house
Mhm.
space or into the shelter space.
Mhm. Thank you. And as you were talking, I just wanted to say something that helps people also understand the nuance of what it looks like to navigate leaving a relationship. Something you said is that awareness and having them know their resources, or even as you just said, people call in, they're like, I'm ready to leave. Do you ever have people call in who talk about their situation but aren't ready to leave or don't feel comfortable leaving? Because I think people think when we reach out, they're ready to go as soon as they make that call, which isn't always the case. So if either of you or maybe Emma with the 2-on-1 calls you get in can talk a little bit more about those situations where people call, they know their situation isn't the best and they're not leaving. Why would that be, or what's some of the reasons behind that?
It happens all the time.
Mhm.
It happens all the time for folks where it is a process. When you think about this, is a relationship that's supposed to be trusting, and a lot of effort has gone in on the part of the perpetrator to remove that control and that agency to make those decisions. So that decision to take that leap to leave is a really difficult one.
Mhm.
And we also do know that when women leave, right after they leave, that's one of the most dangerous times for them.
Mm.
And so we want to make sure that it's done in a way that they feel comfortable and they feel safe, that they don't feel coerced into leaving,
Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
just perpetuating
Mhm.
the entire situation for them. So it is not uncommon for us to speak to women who will identify things in their conversation with us that are like, oh, this isn't maybe okay and it's not okay. And we want to make sure that we acknowledge for
Mhm.
them so that they understand that we heard them,
Yeah.
and that this is maybe not okay, and that there are options.
Mhm.
So we present those options. And sometimes it is making a plan for them to stay safe if they choose to stay,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
being okay with that, and them knowing that if anything changes, um, we're just a phone call
Mhm.
away.
Mhm.
Really,
Mhm.
that is what it is. And same thing with, we'll have the other end of that spectrum where women have left,
Yeah.
and they're needing to get connected into supports because the pull to go back is strong,
Right.
particularly now with the way that things are with economic
Mhm.
pressures and
Mhm.
housing pressures and things
Mhm.
like that. The draw to go
Yeah.
back is really, really strong. And so we
Mhm.
want to make sure that whenever they're at that point, wherever they are on
Yeah.
that point, they know that there are options available to them, and that
Mhm.
we will support them
Mhm.
in getting
Mhm.
them connected.
Yeah, makes sense. It's almost like, the devil, it's more comfortable to be with that.
Absolutely.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And I think we just talked about what it's like to get connected to the support. So I'm going to hand it off back to Baichi to kind of see once they're kind of in, they get connected with Ashley at Winhouse or Emma at 211. What are the next steps for navigating those relationships?
Yeah, so I always wonder what it feels like to be an immigrant and who has left their families behind and then come to a new country, and then they have to, leave this situation and how hard it can be. So I wonder when it comes to this kind of situation, how Winhouse and 211 helps support those women or, people.
Mhm. Yeah, so we do experience that quite a bit. And the experiences of the people we're serving is a lot of isolation. And there's also an insane amount of stigma and that they're receiving from their community, because leaving a relationship and divorce is frowned upon in some cultures. And so we have women in shelter who are being excommunicated from their communities. Their families aren't talking to them, even families that are back home, and they are alone. And they are in our shelter with their kids or without. and trying to navigate a very complex, isolating space. And sometimes we are not speaking the same language,
Mhm.
because a lot of one of the control tactics is not allowing the woman to learn the language in the country that she's living in. So it continues to keep her isolated within the home and needing of support of the human she's uh, in a relationship with. And so we will have translation services accessible. We have cultural supports accessible. We'll connect to external supports that can support in immigration status or whatever that may be. And then we also have our second stage shelter. So it's Win 3, and Win 3 supports women and children who are fleeing violence and are at risk of losing their status or have precarious immigration status. And they can live within our space for up to 2 years, working on their stability within the country, working on maybe divorce, and getting stabilized within the community so that they can move on and be successful uh, Canadians.
Mhm.
That's wonderful. So I'm an immigrant myself, and I can feel like how daunting it can be to leave such situation. And as you said, like you have translation support, so that would be very much comforting for those women, who really need the support, and they will gonna feel like, okay, I can leave right now because I have the support ready, and it's wonderful that you guys do that. So I wonder, like, once they have like reached out to you, how do you usually navigate each of these different circumstances that we just talked about? Like, do you guys often provide person-centered support or approach to those women or those persons?
Yeah, so Winhouse's values are person centered, forward thinking without exception. So really that translates into every work, every piece of practice and work that we do. We also operate from a trauma informed, low barrier and harm reduction perspective. So we really try to start where the woman is at, um, and take it from there. So what do they need, and how can we be there for them? It isn't about us, and it isn't about our goals. It is 100% woman led and child led. What does this family need, and how can we achieve this with you?
Um, in 211, do they also have the language
Mhm.
translation supports and the technical supports that they need?
Absolutely. So when you phone 211, unfortunately not available on text and chat, but when you phone 211 24/7, we have access to third-party interpreter services. So we can bring somebody else in to that conversation in over 170 languages. We have not yet had a language that we can't accommodate, and it's right away. So hopefully that starts to reduce a little bit of that barrier that language accessibility has. And then I think a key piece as well is if we are using our interpreter services to support somebody, we want to make sure that when we hand them off to the next step, that next step also has the ability or capacity to support them in the language that makes the most sense for them. And if it doesn't, let's find the more holistic wraparound support that does. Um, just leaning in a little bit to what Ashley said, we are always person centered and trauma informed. We take a collaborative and empowerment based approach to supporting anybody. And so it really is having them identify what it is specifically that they think might be helpful for them. And if they don't know what is even in the realm of possibility of support, we want to be able to give that education to identify like there is an option to go to a shelter. There is an option to stay with somebody else that you feel safe with. There are outreach supports. There are lots of different things that can come into play for supporting people. And sometimes it's just that fear of the unknown and what might be possible and feasible. And in particular for newcomers who don't understand the Canadian
Right.
system
Yeah.
that is unfortunately quite siloed in a lot of ways. And the steps, Ashley kind of already alluded to, the steps that you have to go through in a legal sense, in a social care sense, healthcare,
100%.
childcare, all of those things are all kind of siloed systems for people. And if you're not familiar with the Canadian system to begin with, this is even a more daunting task. So we want people to know that there are supports.
That's wonderful to, have the support ready for those women or people that, have to leave those situation. So I wonder, like, what kind of experience they would expect when they, call 211 or Win House, and they, need the support, and what kind of like experience they will gonna have. For instance, I'm thinking in my head, like, will they also have the kind of resources available to empower them in future, because like it's not just the time or situation they are in, but also in future they need to have something to empower themselves and feel independent.
100%. Yeah, the goal in Winhouse is to um, support, because we're a point in time service. The emergency shelter is a point in time service. It's a short-lived stay. Right now, we're averaging about a 30 to 60-day stay. Most shelters most women emergency shelters are aiming for a 21 to 30-day stay. Um, and like I said, we're averaging about a 30 to 60-day stay. And within that point of time, where our hope is to really build the community of supports around each individual they um, as they want, like client-centered, as they drive their journey. Because as soon as they leave our space, we're no longer available as a service. And so being able to connect them to the community is essential. So things like we partner with YWCA, and they come in and do on-site counseling for free of charge to the residents. That service can follow them when they leave the shelter. We have supports through housing programs that can follow individuals once they're connected in shelter, when post shelter. And we will, if there is ID, we'll try to make sure we're getting the ID completed while they're in shelter, so then they have that post shelter, and really creating those connections so that, and if they need a long-term support worker, really trying to connect to those services so that they have something long-term. And within our second stage shelter, the whole goal is to create, go from dependence on the system to independence, interdependence and independence. So we're working in that 2 years to create a really stable environment, so that somebody is very successful when they leave our program and are not having to, their choices and return to the scary place I left, or live in shelter, that they have the skills.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. I wonder, like, what are the current number of spaces you have in Win House?
So in total, we have in our emergency beds, we have 60 emergency beds that can accommodate women and children, and that uh, includes individual women and families, and children. And in our second stage, we have can accommodate up to 11 people, but it works out to about 4 families.
With that, I have a question in my head. Like, do
Mhm.
you feel like you guys have enough beds or people to stay for 30 days, as you said?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that um, because of the housing crisis and the affordability crisis we're currently experiencing, people are staying in our shelter longer. So we're having a bit of a bottleneck. Our calls are increasing. Our calls up for help are increasing, to all of the shelters in Alberta. ACWS just released their recent data, and you can see within that space across Alberta, we are just
Mhm.
consistently having record numbers of calls and residential requests, and domestic violence reports are going up. However, we don't the I don't think the solution necessarily is shelter beds.
Mhm.
We need a space for people to transition to,
Mhm.
whatever that may look like. If that's affordable housing, if that's second stage, that is where we will be able to uh, stop the cyclical nature of sheltering.
Exactly. As you mentioned, the cycle should be broken, and that should be our main aim,
Mhm.
to stop that and raise that as awareness. I think that's what we are doing here. However, I feel like the coordination and collaboration between different local agencies could be helped. So, with that, I will be handing over to Yawa.
Mhm, mhm. No, thank you so much for the insight on exactly like how much Winhouse and 211 are so essential in providing supports. I think what you highlighted shows like when we say the system, we really mean the system. For example, if a woman who's leaving an abusive relationship doesn't have an ID, doesn't have, finances, pay stubs, wasn't working, and now they enter Winhouse, and that's virtually impossible to find housing because you mentioned YWCA. So I am a therapist with the YWCA, and I do see a lot of shelter clients come through our doors or come through my caseload. And then after they leave the shelter, I stay on with them to kind of help them because they still need that counseling support. But for example, some things they mentioned is that they can't get housing because they don't have an ID or they don't have their SIN number or they don't have pay stubs, which is what all landlords ask for because they haven't been working. So now they're stuck. So how can you turn that around in 30 days in a shelter to be able to get them into stable housing? Hint, you can't. You can't do that. So it just goes to show the layers to the system is so intense, and a lot of people don't realize that. Um, and I think the silo nature of the system also makes it difficult. So it's so essential for more integrated. That's why I love the fact that it's a one-stop shop that you can come in and you can get those supports like an ID, you can get counseling, you can get, employment trainings, et cetera, et cetera. But that all comes through collaboration, I'm sure. So with that being said, how is United Way and 211 working with local agencies like Winhouse to improve the process or to improve that collaboration? I know something cool that's coming up in May is the task force. So I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that pilot or how it's going to essentially help that collaboration kind of grow stronger.
Yeah. You got it? I got it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we want to make the journey simpler for women. And we know that right now in Edmonton, it isn't simple, and that resources are stretched, and that oftentimes women have to retell their story and over and over and over again to get support. And so one of the things that we're working on with Winhouse and with the other Edmonton and area shelters in 211 is to do a little bit of centralized intake, so that no more do women have to phone Winhouse, and if they don't have space, phone Lorena, and if they don't have space, phone a safe place. But they can phone once, and we will have access to bed availability information, and we'll be able to navigate them in a seamless way to the available beds that meet their needs. And if unfortunately there are not available beds, look at alternative options that have a connection into an outreach support. So it's about us coordinating ourselves a little bit more, so that there's fewer steps along that continuum of getting in to receiving support
100%.
if they're experiencing domestic violence or gender-based violence. So we're really excited to be trialing that. It's a pilot project, so we're hoping that we'll learn some really valuable things and see some positive outcomes for people and women experiencing domestic violence.
We're really hoping to make safety a phone call away.
Yeah,
versus
literally.
7 phone calls.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know that makes sense because especially my experience with the clients, if you have one bad experience, you call one place, you're less likely to call twice and 3 and 4 times because once that hopelessness sets in, and that's what they're already struggling with to begin with, that feeling of hopelessness or powerlessness. So I can imagine how empowering it's going to be just to call once and have access to like 10 different places as opposed to having to individually call those 10 different places. Because I think like by the time they hit the third one, they're not going to make that fourth phone call. So that's really cool to see coming up. And kind of overall, we've spoken a lot about intervention and how we can all do our part in making sure that we're helping people after they've gotten into these situations and helping them get out. But the bigger question, which we've been asking ourselves probably as a society for the last however many years, is what can we do to prevent violence? What more supports do you think are needed to be able to prevent a lot of the clients that you see, the people that you help from entering the situations in the first place? And honestly, I don't know if there is a right answer. Maybe there's not right now, but happy to hear from either of you what your experience or what your insights are on this.
I think that there isn't really a great answer here, but I think breaking cycles of violence and working intentionally with kiddos and what their experiences are, because it is very likely when you are experiencing violence at a young age, you are that is your reality.
Yeah.
That is where you've come from. And so the likelihood of you repeating those cycles is high.
Yeah.
And so working intentionally with little people about what healthy relationships are, what
Mhm.
toxic masculinity looks like,
Mhm.
and hoping to create spaces that kids can come back to and have support ongoing, even post shelter, so that there are ongoing lessons about healthy relationships as
Mhm.
they navigate the world.
Mhm.
Kids are so impressionable,
Yeah.
and there's so much they have to go through at such a young age, no matter what their circumstances are.
Mhm.
And so being really intentional with kids,
Mhm.
I think is super important.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Mhm. No,
Yeah.
and that's really um, kind of the bigger picture thinking because for both sides, someone that has seen, a little boy growing up seeing a male figure enact violence, or a little girl seeing violence enacted upon her, they might think that's the way. This is the normal thing to do.
Mhm.
So even though it doesn't feel good or it's not right, this is what I know. And we talked about it. Right? The devil,
Mhm.
is kind of what a lot of us stick with. So thanks.
Yeah.
And Emma, I think you had something else. Well,
But yeah, I mean, I think it's really about kind of breaking down some of those gender stereotypes as
Mhm.
Mhm.
well for people. So
Mhm.
we know that this is not okay, and that
Mhm.
awareness
Mhm.
that it's not okay for that control over,
Mhm.
that everybody kind of has that innate human right to
Mhm.
self-determination and
Mhm.
to be able to make their own decisions and their own
Mhm.
choices in their life.
Mhm.
And so those are big pieces. It's not just about women who are experiencing violent taking action. It's about the communities around them
Mhm.
recognizing that it's not okay and breaking down kind of the stigma and the barriers around that so that we can kind of address those root causes,
Mhm.
and not
Mhm.
just do
Yeah.
intervention. And
Work for
kids and
prevention.
men and boys, it's everybody
Uh-huh.
engaging in that dialogue about what's a healthy relationship and what's not a healthy relationship and what
Mhm.
is abuse,
Mhm.
and what does it look like and what can it look like and why it's not okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, this isn't just a behind closed doors issue.
Mhm.
This is an everybody issue.
Everybody issue, yeah.
Yeah.
And even in terms of everybody, so it sounds like you don't have to be the director of 211 or Win House to be able to prevent or do your part. So what can listeners right now who are listening to podcasts, what are some practical ways that they can support the work to end gender-based violence?
I think engaging in conversations and understanding what gender based violence is and knowing what to look for. And if there isn't shame around, if somebody is in a abusive relationship, not judging, like, why don't you just leave? It's about supporting them and hearing what they have to say and just really reducing shame, and then supporting organizations that are doing the work
Mhm.
to um, create the education and
Mhm.
support the humans that are experiencing the violence.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Mhm. So no matter how big or small, everyone can have a
Mhm.
part essentially.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, as you just said, like it literally resonated on my head that like it can happen with anyone.
Mhm.
And when it comes to this kind of situation or violence happening, a lot of the times people just keep it into themselves and they just don't want to speak up.
Mhm.
So, what should someone do when they listen to someone experiencing that, but they just don't want to speak up, or your loved one, that violence is happening, but they just don't want to share with someone. So, in those kind of situations, what should someone do?
I think, again, it's not about being full of having creating shame and listening and being a support and understanding. But then there's also the helplines. We have 211, we have Winhouse's helpline, and we're here to help and to listen and to give education in a trauma informed, client centered way. They're just making that phone call is extremely scary,
Mhm.
and however, once you make the phone call, there isn't pressure to leave. We're going to support you in all facets, whatever that looks like for you, however that looks like for you. If it's just to listen because you need to get it off your chest, we are there to do that.
I think it's important too that people, if you're concerned about people in your life, that you know that isolation is such a huge component
Hmm.
of violence and abuse. And so we want to do the things to break down that isolation, as is the taking away control.
Mhm.
And so if you know someone who may be experiencing this or you're kind of seeing some signs, it's taking those steps to try to move past that isolation so that
Mhm.
they know that you are a safe support,
Yeah.
but also remembering that they need to have control and choice.
Yeah.
And so awareness of what options are available for whomever you're concerned about is great. And anybody is welcome to call 211 at any point in time and ask about resources for themselves or for somebody else. So you can know the options and be able to provide non-judgment
Mhm.
and a safe place, but also information about options.
Mhm.
Exactly. Knowing the options and the supports that are there, it just not helps someone experiencing that, but also their loved one. That okay, my loved one has experiencing these things, and now I can be of her help, and that is really, really helpful for everyone to know that support is there. Just you need to call or listen or just know what are there available. So I am sure that you both have, lots of good stories and lots of really nice stories that demonstrates what makes a difference. So in your words, we really want to hear about the stories that you have had.
I can think of one that comes to the top of my head. We had a client, a resident staying at Win House who was in a pretty terrible circumstance and had left with her kiddos into our shelter. So we had a space. We admitted a mom and two kids. And in her journey with us, she was able to achieve her housing goals and she got ID, she got enrolled in school, and she was accepted into a second stage housing. And so she gets to continue on her journey and her journey with a life free from violence. And she is so happy and has sent us an email since leaving saying that she is beyond grateful for the support that she received at Win House because it made it possible for her to live a life free from violence.
Witnessing this situation, like you must feel very proud of yourself, the work that you guys do, and helping the women that needs the most. I am sure that's wonderful. So, what are the words of encouragement or advice would you offer?
To women,
Yes, of course.
to remind all women we are strong. We can tackle anything. You have the power inside of you to be an autonomous, self-determined human. You can be stable and independent.
Thank you. That gives power to everyone listening to this podcast.
Mhm.
Similar to me, like
Mhm.
I'm also feeling like so great to hear those words.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Do you want to add anything?
I mean, I think it's just that you're not alone, that there are supports out there and change is possible. And that there are people who are able to give you that helping hand, um, and so that you can take those steps for yourself and for your family to move towards a better future, which is awesome. But really, you are not alone.
Mhm.
There are many of us out there who want to support and to help, and there are also women who have gone through this and come out the other side
Mhm.
that can act as an inspiration and a support for people who going through it now.
Mhm.
That's really inspirational. With that, I will
Mhm.
hand it over to Yawa.
Thank you both for that advice and words of encouragement. I think it's really impactful because you're not just saying it to say it, but you've actually seen these things and you believe them because you've seen women come in one way and leave out another way. And that's really empowering. And I know in my experience seeing, and that's one of the things because people probably wonder, what keeps you in this job? What keeps you, you're probably hearing devastating stories every single day, but you still go in and you still do your best to kind of improve the lives of women. And I think people don't realize how impactful it is to see, for example, a woman come in without any of those, capital and resources, and now have housing, and now be happy, and have them say that I never thought I would be here, is something that, keeps you going every single day. And that's something that I really appreciate. Both the work of Win House and 211 really cannot be overemphasized enough. So we really appreciate that. And your exit ticket today, if you want to leave the podcast, specifically the Do Local Good podcast, is letting us know, for both of you, Ashley and Emma, what does doing local good mean to you?
To me, it's about smiling at everyone in the community,
Mhm.
which includes the humans that are houseless in our community. We are all community members, and giving a good smile and letting people know it's about isolation and loneliness, that you are seen.
Mhm.
Mhm. For me, do local good is we are all human beings in this space. We are all experiencing what we are experiencing. And I think we want to create that community and that culture of care where we live, where we're at. And just like, yeah, that smile, that helping hand, that understanding and non judgment is so,
Mhm.
so important um, with everything that's going on in the world.
Mhm. Mhm. Amazing. Well, I can see you're doing local good very well then. And the three pillars for United Way that really are the essence behind why we do what we do are strengthening mental well-being, eliminating barriers to educational resources, and reducing or increasing financial literacy. So, out of those three pillars, for both of you, which one resonates the most?
For me, coming from Canadian Mental Health Association,
Yes, yeah,
it's an
I can guess
organization.
which one. Yeah.
Absolutely, mental well-being is so important. We know that stresses impact us all in many different ways, and that can be barriers for us getting help. And so,
Mhm.
having a community that is supportive of mental well-being across the board, and people who understand their own mental wellness and their own mental health and the steps that they can take and the resources at their disposal is so, so important.
Mhm.
Coming from an economic stability perspective for me, because women, the uh, empowerment for women is to be financially stable.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so ensuring financial literacy is definitely important to me.
Mhm, mhm. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. I'm sure myself and Baichi could be here for the next 3-4 hours, but that's our time for today, and that's the show. Thank you both so much for sharing your knowledge and for all that you do to help build resilient, connected, and thriving communities here in Edmonton and the Alberta capital region. And to everyone listening, doing local good starts with you. So to find out how you can help, head to myunitedway.ca/gennext, or you can check out the links in the show notes. And together we can all make sure that no one is left behind. And if you enjoyed today's episode, which I don't know how you couldn't, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And we will see you in the next episode.